Godfrey, so yesterday I followed in part the lecture because I was at an NCC event.
Yes.
And first, let's talk about the importance of having lectures for people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like we need to do more of those things where we celebrate people and we bring somebody to speak, to think, to raise the issues. This is part of the development discourse.
Yeah, but I think as a country we do well
with that,
with these
memorial lectures.
With the memorial lectures. Mm-hmm. I think if we followed it religiously, you would realize that almost at least every quarter. Mm-hmm. You would have.
I think there's a Banredu one.
Yeah.
There's a Akoto. There's the Gettysburg Fraser.
Some are more public.
There's the Dacha Clufio. There's a lot. There's a lot.
We have a lot of important things are discussed. And also, let's just remember these persons and who they were and what they meant to the history of this country. You know, I'm a big fan of remembering thinkers and people who did things for this country, not necessarily people who became president
or politicians
for that matter, but just people who were civic oriented, you know, if that is a word. And so hearing yesterday Professor
H.K
Prempeh speaking at the Akoto Ampaw, I'm a big fan of Akoto Ampaw. I think that every child in this country needs to know about Akoto Ampaw. Every adult in this country also needs to know about Akoto Ampaw. It's somebody we need to work as a country not to forget. What he means to the democracy that we enjoy, what he means to being a citizen of a country, basically, what your responsibilities are. You know, so I was excited by that. And
one of the things for me that I found interesting was that, you know, he was one of the lawyers who was part of the election petition for the MPP. But in dealing with him, he cut across.
Oh, yes.
Some of his best friends are people of a very strong socialist orientation. And in every conversation, when he's part, people defer to him because of his wisdom, you know. And for a man of such great accomplishments, it was very simple. I remember doing an interview with him during the COVID period. I think I interviewed he and H.K Prempeh. A very simple guy. He always calls with a landline when you want to reach him. I remember seeing him use a mobile phone. And he's very thoughtful. And of course, we are much younger. So we didn't, you know, people like Kwesi Pratt and co would have grown up with him in the struggle. So they would know him from a very personal point of view. I became more political in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I just sort of understood from what others said, what he did. All right. But in dealing with him as a journalist and in sort of trying to get some insight from him, discussing some of the work we do, there are not many people like that.
Yeah, you know.
There are not very many people like that in our country who are so brilliant but simple, who are so clear in their thinking on what they do, so principled. Principled, because
and that is the key word.
Principled.
I think it comes to Akoto Ampaw. Principle.
Yeah.
What he stood for and what he believed in did not change.
Yeah.
The key ones, of course, over, you know, the public statements he made, which is why I make that case for some persons we have known who stood for certain things, and then over a period of time they start telling you different things, and you're like, who is this person? Because some of the convictions and the principles that you hold by, principles are supposed to be things that are nigh on unshakable.
Yes.
You know, and Akoto Ampaw, I think, was representative of that. He was a keen advocate of social justice.
Yes.
No matter where it was being done, if he had to do the case for free. And I recall Professor Titu Amenu last year also granted an interview where she spoke about the fact that he did so many pro bono cases. For a lawyer of his stature,
I'm telling you,
he would just take on whatever case if he felt somebody was being stepped on, somebody was being treated unfairly. He would just take the case and just go and see it through. Yes,
see it through.
He wasn't into the business of I'm passing the buck.
Yeah,
you know, and he knew how to engage with people. So I was happy that yesterday we got the first Akoto Ampaw lectures, and we hope to have more.
With ChannelOne as your exclusive media
taking
partner,
the lead,
bringing it to you live. Because we didn't make a lot of noise about it, many people may not have known the significance. But sometimes we do these things for principle.
Yes.
Because of the man and what he stood for.
Yeah.
And because of the quality of the conversation and the quality of people who were there. Professor Kwame Kakari was there. Professor Georgie Chikata was there. It was a very rich conversation. And I hope maybe, OJ, you want to play it back at some point, because maybe the time it was aired, people may not have watched it. I think it was a very quality discourse around our democracy. I don't know what HKP said that you would think was...
Oh, HKP said a lot of things. Actually, some feed into the points I was making yesterday, because he spoke about the fact that, and I quote here in the report by Daniel Kinu on page 38 of the Daily Graphic. It says a quote about Ghana stands tall as an oasis of a stable, steady democratic progress since the country returned to democracy in January 1993. This progress is made more remarkable against the backdrop of a post-independence national history marked by a successful failed attempt by institutionalizing democratic government. And then also he talks about the beauty of Ghana's democracy being that election disputes have been resolved through constitutionally prescribed processes. And then this one was important for me. I found it very interesting. So touching on citizens' participation in the democratic process, he reckoned that while voter turnout was about 70% on the average, citizens' interest in demonstration was just about 5%, which did not augur well for the country's democracy. He said such failure of citizens to fully participate in all processes of democracy, especially demonstrations, to mount pressure on government to do the right things, as well as the frustrations by the police and a complicit judicial system, were some of the setbacks of Ghana's democracy.
So in a sense, people have they have conflated voting for citizenship.
Yes.
Whereas there are various civic duties beyond just mere voting.
Yes. Also spoke about the monetization of our politics, you know, and then others also spoke. So I'll
probably bring some highlights. I'll bring some highlights of the
our
speech.
morning audience to hear.
I'll bring some highlights of that.
I was excited. Also spoke about the fact that how can we have 13 presidential candidates on the ballot? He said it was unnecessary. I want to hear his full case.
What he's trying to say there.
On that as well.
You know, I agree with you. This was a very important conversation that summarized a lot of things we've been saying, particularly for me, what a citizen's duty is. All right. And when I was very young, there was a course I used to do called civics. All right. So if you look at the curriculum of the old system, I had brothers who were in class 7. It wasn't just class 6, and they used to have civics and things, but somehow it's been taken out of our coursework. So now they have just civic clubs. But you see, if you are building a nation, the essential building block of a nation is the citizen. And the citizen needs to understand their role and responsibility. And for a young nation, taking civics out of our curriculum and replacing it with all these newfangled concepts, every day they change. They do, RME, then next week is this. We are having generations that even don't have, there's no continuity in what we know. Do you get it? So the 80s generation learned some things, the 90s learned some things, 2000s learned some things. I was looking at the voters. We have, since 92, people who have voted 8 times up to once. And I can say in every decade, something changes. Now we have the TikTok generation. All right. But civics is basic. Even if you're going to take out the curriculum, you can say, let's come up with programs on radio and maybe national TV which promote citizenship. NCC is grossly underfunded. All right. So people think citizenship is just voting, and that's all they do. They don't understand the fine balance between a responsibility and a right. All of that is lost on us. So people just live. I still see people drive cars and throw orange peels out of their window onto a high street. I mean, if you really understood certain basics about what our collective responsibilities for our environment, you would not do that. Okay, and we can have all the macroeconomic stability, you can have all the big English and manifestos. If the citizen's mind is not well tuned, it will be very difficult to develop the country. Because at the end of the day, it's what people do that builds a country. Do you get it? No matter what the government does, if the citizens can't cooperate. So I really want us to use this opportunity to go back to the concept of citizenship. We'll bring you some highlights shortly from that voice note, and I'll let you talk a bit about your own reflections on Akoto Ampaw as well. And by the way, those of you who don't know who Akoto Ampaw is, how can they find out? Is there anything on him that they can read or learn? Because I think it's important, right?
I think there are a number of articles on
cases. What of his seminal cases? You can do a list for me later, or some of the cases is done or something.
I mean, the people in the legal profession know that. I mean,
but you're in the legal profession.
Yeah, but it will come and be bombarding people.
I don't. But we want to know.
I think it's He's a distinguished brain in his own right. One of the finest legal minds Ghana ever produced. He's in a class of his own, more like a locus classicus, as the lawyers would say. And distinguished by every measure of
I mean, a locus classicus.
Yes, and so, you know, it's impossible to talk about him. I have a family relationship with him. By reason of my marriage to a daughter of the family.
But you didn't tell me.
It's not.
Well, I needed to call him and I wasn't getting his number. You should have told me that your wife is related to him.
Yes. So I have very fond memories.
Oh,
of
wow.
him. And may his soul continue to rest.
Sky, but you know, try. You have to share the knowledge. A locus classicus.
Who can forget his famous wig at
the election?
200 years old.
It was different.
You know, 2013, Godfrey used to do something when the election petition is holding. We have it live on TV.
Give me work, cool.
So when we finish the breakfast show, he will sit in this chair
for hours
from 10 o'clock till sometimes 2 p.m. basically watching the petition and summarizing it. And you know, a lot of people were interested in the petition because it was the first time that the courts were brought to us. Yeah. So it whilst you were doing it, you didn't know it was that serious. But to actually follow a court proceeding, I'm sure a lot of people decided to be lawyers by just watching that thing. You know, it was amazing to see Akoto Ampaw on his feet. You know, the Afarijan grilling by Philip Addison, the Baumia grilling by what's his name, Chachuchi Kata. And then there was the Tony Litha. I mean, those things are.
Then you had
we should do a movie out of that.
Then you had Mr. Amekuji.
No, Amekuji is the next. Amekuji was the 2020.
No, Amekuji was 2012.
No, sorry.
Amekuji friend of the court.
Amicus Curiae. Yes, the concept.
But look at the caliber of lawyers we had: Philip Addison, Chachuchi Kata, Akoto Ampaw. Who else was there? Some very senior.
Oh no! I mean,
it was a powerful.
Tony Addison.
Tony
Litha was there.
Yes.
You had also the NPP team had quite a number of lawyers.
Yeah.
Gabi was there.
Even Egbert Fabil and a couple of the guys in the Akufo Prempeh team.
Yeah, all of them.
And then there was but there was also Kwasi Island.
Oh, Kwasi Island for the Electoral Commission.
For the Electoral Commission.
Also another distinguished.
But you know the funny thing though, the new EC lawyer.
Yeah, the one who opens that. Yeah.
Oh.
The guy there's a meme of him with this.
You know, I'm trying
to.
No, the guy's name
with his eyes. You know, that's what threatening.
No, what's the guy's name? Like,
oh, lawyer.
Yes,
I forget.
Charlie, the guy,
he's also a very fine.
They call it Eagle Eye.
Godfrey, you wanted to say something?
I was saying I was reading up on some of the things.
Oh, what have I forgotten the guy's name?
Cases.
Justin Amenuvo.
Yes,
Amenuvo.
This one,
but I hope they.
When I see you get that chop hot, I was doing the calculation.
No, Justin Amenuvo is a big man. This is our Eklenku. No. So we remember all those fun times. 2013, 2014. 2013 was a very
15, actually.
Interesting time for Ghana. That election petition.
All of that,
yeah. So may so rest in peace. All right, let's get into some of the highlights of the speech delivered by Executive Director of CDD, Prof H.K Prempeh. He was speaking about citizenship and our democracy, the role of citizens in a democracy. Here are some highlights.
Ghana is in the final weeks of a crucial election year. This is happening at a time of exceptional economic angst amongst the population. The country is in the midst of its first ever sovereign debt default, and once again under some form of adult supervision by the IMF. The 17th time we have had to make recourse to the IMF since independence, and I believe the 6th time since the return to democratic government in 1993. This historic sovereign debt default has been accompanied by hyperinflation, which reached as high as 50 plus 2 years ago, and currently hovers around 25%, as well as haircuts on domestic investments by Ghanaians holding government bonds. But you wouldn't know any of this if you follow the candidates and their song and dance election campaigns across the country. On the campaign trail, you continue to hear promise upon promise of whatever needs to be said to win an election. What you will not hear is discussion of how to break the stranglehold of debt, of Eurobond debt, or the habit of IMF recidivism in which we are caught. No way out of the economic cul-de-sac. Just more Kool-Aid from the political parties and their candidates. After all, when push comes to shove, those we elect to run our public affairs, and for that matter, our economy, will, especially if a general election is on the horizon, simply turn to external managers we have never elected and cannot hold to account to step in again with a bailout and to steer the sinking economic ship back to safe harbor, albeit only temporarily. Constitutional system, we continue to hold on to a persistent colonial era model of local government, or better, local administration, characterized by a national elite paternalism towards local communities. No different from during the colonial period when the colonial authorities, represented by the governor, dealt with our local communities, the natives, so to speak, with an air of superiority and paternalism. So, 30-something years into democratic rule, our president, a lineal descendant of the colonial governor, continues to nominate and appoint the mayors or chief executives of all administrative districts across the country. Despite strong popular demand for local governments to elect their own chief executives, no supply has been forthcoming from the national elites at the center. A constitutional referendum originally scheduled for late 2019 was called off at the last minute by presidential fiat because the two parliamentary parties, the sole gatekeepers of constitutional revision under Ghana's elite-friendly constitution, could not reconcile their rival partisan preferences in the interest of the collective good. Thus, thanks to persistent elite inertia and an unwillingness to reach consensus on a critical piece of constitutional reform to democratize local government and empower local communities to take charge of their own affairs, our electoral democracy remains Accra-centered. The third example of our democracy's apparent inability to solve critical public problems, comes from the story of Galamsey, or illegal artisanal mining. Again, despite the scale and gravity of the devastation this widespread practice is causing to the country's ecology, water supply systems, and long-term public health, resolute action has not been forthcoming from the political classes. And here, they do not even pretend to conceal their self-serving reasons for not acting resolutely to stop the ecocide. If they did, they tell us, they risk losing votes in the illegal artisanal mining communities to their political rivals. Therefore, for the sake of their own political careers and partisan agendas, the ecocide and related adverse public health consequences must continue. And we are told this to our faces. Our democracy has been turned against us. Instead of a government of the people, by the people, for the people, we have ended up, it appears, with a government of the party, by the party, for the party, and its partisans. How to change this picture? This is where citizenship enters the equation. I think from Plato to Alexis de Tocqueville to Kofi Annan, political philosophers, statesmen, students of politics, all have noted, long noted, the indispensable role of an engaged citizenry or civic engagement in changing the course and quality of public affairs and government. Permit me to just cite a few from these best people that I've mentioned. Plato says, The punishment which the wise suffer, who refuse to take part in government, is to live under the rule of worse men, emphasizing the very importance of public participation, civic engagement. De Tocqueville says, the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by its private citizens. Right? So what citizens do in a democracy has a direct effect on the quality of democracy that they are likely to enjoy, says Alexis de Tocqueville. And our own Kofi Annan had this to say: if there is enough noise, enough pressure, enough organization, the leaders will follow the people. If the people are apathetic, they don't vote, they are leaving the field wide open to the politicians to do what they want. So then, what is to be done? What have we been doing or not doing right? Because I believe that when you look through the record, and we will share some of the evidence, it appears that we vote in very high numbers, probably above average globally, and certainly on the continent. So what is it that has been lacking? What are the choices and options and opportunities and tools available to us as citizens that we might use to change the narrative that I have just presented? The most obvious form of civic engagement is, of course, voting. And God knows that Ghanaians love to vote. Afrobarometer tells us that when asked about the one civic activity that they had participated in the last year, Ghanaians since 2008, roughly around 75+% of Ghanaians said they voted in the last election. So there's very high level of public participation when it comes to voting. Not so other forms of participation, especially when asked, when did you last participate in a demonstration or protest? 5% in 2022, from 4% in 2012. The peak was around 15% 2019. Perhaps we can gain some insights from the late economist and social scientist Albert Hirschman and his influential work, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations and States. What Hirschman sought to do or answer in this very influential book, Exit, Voice and Loyalty, is how we might respond as citizens of a state, consumers of a product, or members of an organization to a sustained decline or retrogression in the quality of the service or satisfaction or value we receive from that state, from that government, from that firm, from that market, or from that organization to which we belong. Hirschman organizes these various options into three. You can exit, that is, express your dissatisfaction by just withdrawing your support or patronage. If it's possible, you could switch. If there's only, you've been patronizing one line of service, you could switch to the alternative if there is a suitable one available. You could also quit entirely, just sit on the fence, just basically lose interest. And you could literally vote with your feet by migrating. And Ghanaians do some of all of this. Secondly, he says, you can resort to voice. You can resort to voice, by which Hirschman means you can become engaged or more engaged, deploying various active options or forms of civic engagement in an attempt to stimulate, provoke, influence, or cause change in the desired direction. Then there is loyalty. That's his third option. When you are in your loyalty mode, well, you have pretty much resigned yourself to fate, so to speak. It's more like the do-nothing different option. You put up with the bad service or governance, and ride out the bad times in the hope and expectation, at best, that things would get better. Hirschman did not use these as mutually exclusive categories, though in his view, the only two options that counted, because they both sought to cause a change in the decline one was experiencing, were exit and voice. Didn't count loyalty as very effective. And of voice, Hirschman calls voice the political action par excellence, and a residual of exit, because, as he writes, and I quote, it is the only way in which dissatisfied customers or members can react whenever the exit option is unavailable. So when you are stuck in the system, when you can't quit it, when you can't leave it, Hirschman says you have nothing else but voice. Few people I know have explored and deployed as full a range of voice options in their lives as citizens as Akoto Ampaw did in his life. Neither exit, quitting, nor loyalty, keeping silent on doing nothing in the face of a deteriorating or bad situation, seemed available or attractive as options for citizen Akoto Ampaw.
8:35, H.K Prempeh on citizenship. There's more in this next voice clip on why citizenship is more than simply voting. Let's hear him.
Citizens are not a monolith, right? We experience government differently. And especially in a very blatant, unabashed, party-first ideology regime system, right? So we operate the system where the parties are very unabashed about being first and foremost mutual benefit organizations for their members. And they will tell you, but why should we give it to you? Are we also not also Ghanaians? We start with us first. Charity begins at home. So public goods, right? So you may be experiencing very bad government, but actually the political class has managed to find a way in which they use public power and incumbency to divert public resources and opportunities in favor of partisans, so that they will be having a different experience from you. So while you are protesting, they're asking you, what is wrong with you? It has never been this good, right? Because they're having a completely different experience of government from what you are experiencing. The party government doesn't serve the citizens generally in that way. Thus, even when there is voice, it is met with often harsh rival counter voice, right? So we invest, when you look at where party investments go, the parties have, I don't know if I know any party policy advisor, but there are lots of party communicators. It's the new profession in our democracy. Party communicators, government communicators, they're all over the place. These are propagandists, and they are putting out a narrative that is basically maybe very different from your reality, right? But that's their job. And the other side is countering them with their own alternative reality. It's basically, that's how the voice is working on the ground. So, but if you are getting government jobs, not through merit, but because of partisan criteria, you are getting government scholarships because of partisan criteria, you are getting government contracts because of partisan criteria, then how are you going to say that you and I share the same experience of bad government? You are experiencing something different. In fact, even public goods like streets and roads, sometimes are distributed based on such criteria. So you would find that somebody can say, because you don't know any big person. The road to your place is not nice, crowd. Come and see the other guy. It's just two rows behind you. Yeah? You see the road. They've done his fine. You are sitting on TV talking grammar. You see your road. Right? So my experience from that person's experience of government is different. And we do these things. Right? Then protest. Why do we protest so little? There are huge barriers, right? But I think structurally too, there are some points that we need to consider, right? So when you have a very over-centralized state as we do, right? Over-centralized government where everything that is going to be good for the country that must happen cannot happen unless you get the attention of the president who resides only in Accra and in one office. And everything bad that needs to be undone in this country cannot get any traction if you don't get that same person's attention. You are very highly centralized. So when you have to do collective action, protest, where are you going to do it? In Bogoso? If you don't have access to Accra, it will not get political traction. Decision makers don't reside at the local level, right? So you may be feeling the pinch of the problem at the local level, but nobody there can remedy the situation for you. So when you over-centralize government, it increases the cost of protest and other forms of activism that need to get the attention of those who can resolve the problem, right? And of course, when you do that, it shuts out lots of people who cannot access, who don't have access to the center, especially youth and women, who, in fact, if there was more power at the local level, right, within reach of your home, you could go and protest. Those who are disproportionately disfavored in terms of resources would actually probably be more active citizens, right, than they can be now. But there are other protests, there are other barriers that are very, very intentional. And here, heavy-handed policing. Policing, the use of heavy-handed policing and a complicit court system to basically prevent and discourage protest, right? In a very, it's almost paradoxical. African governments, I have noticed, sometimes fear protest even more than they fear voting. Because, voting, you can do things with voting, right? And in fact, one of the reasons why switching also doesn't make a whole lot of sense is that there's a lot of vote buying, right? Governments and parties spend lots of money buying votes. It's not easy to buy protests like that, right? You can set up a counter-protest, of course, but a determined protester, can't be bought off that easily. So they prevent it. So government that allow voting prevent protest. It sounds paradoxical, right? The voting is the one that will take you out. But protest, you don't even want protest to happen, right? And this is notwithstanding effort by people like Akoto Ampaw, who in the early years of our revolution, of our democracy, managed to get the Supreme Court, right? Lawyers managed to get the Supreme Court to rule that citizens have a right to protest. And that doesn't include getting pre-clearance or permission from the police. That is still the law of the land. Notwithstanding that, you can't protest if the police do not want you to protest. So there are real barriers to protest, right? And I've mentioned counter-mobilization by parties. You protest, the most organized force in the country are political parties. That's the most organized force in the country politically. So when they put people on the streets, it's difficult to counter them. You are doing a protest, you have only 50 people, and they bring 1,000 to counter you. What are you going to do? Right? And then there's religion. Right? It plays a very interesting role, appears in different places when we talk about voice. Religion is playing a very interesting role in our politics. Right? Depending on the type of religion, it could say, well, your problems are not with government, just go and pray. Right? Prayer will solve the problem. And so you disengage. You are wasting time going to protest when you should be in church or mosque or seeing the pastor. Because that's where the solution is going to come from according to that theology. Right? So a lot of citizens, they become more on the loyalty side of the thing. Let's just wait and pray and see how things will change. Another angle, I think, in other places that would have been really very good in a democracy is participating in parties. Because parties really are have become the conduits through which we recruit our political leadership. So if you want to make change, in many respects, if parties were democratic, deliberative bodies, policy-making bodies about ideas, a lot of people should be going through that. But our parties are not those. They are just election-winning machines that mobilize basically to win elections, and even their internal processes are not democratic. If you want to contest as a member of parliament, some of the criteria would say you have to show that you have nurtured the constituency. Do you understand what that means? Nurtured the constituency as a requirement for becoming a candidate in the party. It means you must have spent money in the preceding 4 years taking care of the party executives and the gatekeepers who are going to make it possible for you to become a candidate. Right? Now, how is that going to encourage many young people, many women, and people without means, but who have serious civic interest? How is that going to encourage them when you have a party system like that? It shuts out a lot of people. So that is not an avenue for them. And in fact, the running for office, as even an independent, Akoto Ampaw did that. He ran for office as a candidate of a party, but in an entrenched duopoly, the cost, the entry barriers are huge. The cost of politics in Ghana is staggering. Staggering. You would be surprised to hear some of the numbers. Presidential, I don't know what it is now, but some years back, CDD did a survey with Westminster Center for Democracy. Over a decade ago, the numbers were, over $100 million. Right? Now it's probably double. Right? Members of parliament spend, and it's not just for the election, you have to almost take care of your constituents, carry them for 4 years. So basically, it's prohibitive. You can't use that channel to get into office to change anything. Right? So the structural barriers are real. Right? There are these structural barriers. So I think that while Hirschman's formulation, I think, helps us to organize our thinking around these issues, when you put it on the ground and you overlay it on the structure that we have in Ghana, it's very difficult. Then you can understand the low numbers. It's not that, yes, there's some apathy, by all means, right? Especially people who have to fend for themselves. If you go on a protest, Charlie, you come back, there's no water. Water is not flowing. There is doomsday, and you are sweaty. Can't eat, So all of these things, right? So are we then stuck? I don't have an answer to that question, but I think that it is in the long-term sustainable interest of our democracy to unfreeze these parts, especially citizen protests.
Spending the morning reflecting on H.K Prempeh's lecture, the role of citizenship in a democracy as part of the Memorial for Akoto Ampaw, a legal colossus, a first anniversary lecture, more as part of the celebration or the commemoration of Akoto Ampaw. Lecture delivered by H.K Prempeh. Now, the full theme was the crisis of civic citizenship in contemporary Ghanaian democracy. Lessons from the life and times of the late Akoto Ampaw. Here's a final excerpt of that speech.
Let me just run through the various ways in which Akoto Ampaw tried to exert voice. And note that in this framework, in Hirschman's framework, voting, any form of public participation counts. Right? So voting is also voice. So of course, I never went into the polling booth with Akoto Ampaw, but I knew that he was a very civic-minded person, and he would vote. When I encountered him the first time, it was interesting. It was as a community organizer, and this was even before the transition to democracy. So some workers working for Ghana, GTP, I forgot exactly the words, in my neighborhood in Tema, there was this guy who was a GTP worker, trade unionist, who was quite interested in the politics of the moment under PNDC. And when I would come from college, from university on vacation, he would come by and engage me in all kinds of conversation about politics, Marxism and the like, he had a lot of choice words that I had never heard. I was a business student. So he would come with words like comprador and all of those. I'm like, what's comprador? So that became his nickname, when we saw each other say comprador, comprador. And I would ask him, where are you getting all these very fanciful ideas? Then he would say, oh, do you know Sheshe? I said, no, I don't know Sheshe. Do you know Yal Graham? I said, no, I don't know these people. I mean, they probably belong in a different camp. And I am a business student. I'm trying to make money. So that is the first time I heard about Akoto Ampaw. And my very good friend Porsche, called him Posh, he would sing their praises and talk eloquently about it. But Akoto Ampaw at the time, then what I learned was that he belonged in this group that would come to the industrial area of Tema and meet with workers in their workplaces and educate them about politics, about rights, labor rights, and all of those things, right? So he was more or less what we would call a community organizer. That's the first act of citizenship of Akoto Ampaw that I recall having encountered just by reputation. Then, of course, he was a lawyer, right? Now, being a lawyer by itself doesn't make you a civic-minded person. We should know that, right? And in fact, Akoto Ampaw did work for a firm you would call a commercial law firm. Almost all law firms in Ghana are commercial law firms, really. That's how they make their bread and butter. But even in his law firm, and to many of us who encountered him in his capacity as a lawyer, Akoto Ampaw was very much a public interest lawyer at heart. So he was very much involved in causes that normally, garden variety lawyers would not take because it made them no money. So he represented a lot of causes in the courts as a litigator. He also advised, the first, Radio Eye, the emergence of Radio Eye as a private broadcast station. When you read the history, Akoto Ampaw's name appears there. A number of libel and sedition cases in the Supreme Court from 1993 to 1996. He was there representing journalists and others. We later encounter him in election petitions, right? Representing his client, representing his law partner, the current president, in his presidential election petitions. But it's a very interesting thing to note about Akoto is that while he did participate in politics, and sometimes on behalf of persons whose politics he may not have shared, or even if he shared them, I would joke sometimes with you and say, me, I'm not MP. But, even if he was MP, he said, but I'm not a foot soldier. He was never a partisan. Akoto Ampaw was a patriot, and when he did politics as a patriot. He was not a partisan. He was a protester par excellence. All right? Kumi Prekon, we remember him for his role with the Alliance for Change in Kumi Prekon. But actually, I remember him just going on a routine anti-corruption march with us through the streets of Accra on, I think, anti-corruption day or one of those events. And he was with a lot of young people from CDD. He was wearing his red stuff, carrying. We walked all the way from, I think, Kwame Nkrumah Circle to El Wak Stadium, and he did the distance with us. This is during the time when his law partner and friend was president. So Akoto Ampaw, for him, this was civic responsibility, right? And Akoto Ampaw was actually a candidate for elective office. That's one of the acts of participation, of citizenship. Running for office. Akoto Ampaw actually ran for political office. Most of us don't know that. He doesn't like to talk about that. He didn't like to talk much about that. But I don't know how badly he lost. But he did lose the election on the ticket of the Convention People's Party. I think it was the 1996 elections in this home constituency. And he was also available for public service, but not in the ways in which we have come to understand them. Akoto Ampaw did not seek public service just because a person had been elected that he knew he would not go lobby for a job. In fact, some of the jobs that the public service engagements he got, I'm sure, were because others were not lobbying for them. Because I remember that I served with him on the Law Reform Commission 2 terms, and it was one of the least remunerative positions you could get. There was no queue to be on the Law Reform Commission, actually. And the interesting thing about his service on the Law Reform Commission, as I recall, is that in the second term, which is this current term, where he was our chair, he was absent on grounds of ill health. And yet he read our minutes and followed the agenda, and there was one particular issue we're considering. A codification of the defamation, the common law of defamation was being codified. Akoto Ampaw, of course, being a very strong free speech advocate and a friend of the media, had taken a very keen interest in this. I remember from the previous commission on which I served as well. And he sent in a note to the chairperson in his absence, acting chair in his absence, that he felt very strongly about a certain proposal in the draft, which would have expanded the scope of the law of defamation to codify and judicialize, for that matter, everyday insults. Right? And Akoto Ampaw thought, that's weird. The Law Reform Commission's job, in his view, was to promote the progressive development of the law, not to go in a regressive direction. And in any case, and this view was shared by some of us on the commission with him, the judicial forum was not the appropriate place to take everyday insults and things of that nature. That there were much more important things to worry about than that. So, and he made his position very, very clear. He had already made that position in a memorandum that he had done for, I think, the Media Foundation for West Africa to the first commission. And that had a big influence on why the process stalled, because we got the same proposal in the first commission, but the process stalled largely because of the objections and some of the reservations raised in Akoto Ampaw's memo on behalf of the Media Foundation. He also served on the National Media Commission. It's a constitutional body that is supposed to safeguard the independence of the media against governmental encroachment, and Akoto Ampaw did serve on the National Media Commission. These were all part-time roles because he continued his career as a lawyer. And I also, in fact, thanks to former Attorney General here, Gloria Akufo, he and I were invited to assist and advise the Attorney General in 2017 in representing Ghana against Cote d'Ivoire in our international maritime boundary case, which took us in the company of the Attorney General to various places, to London, to Hamburg, to represent the government and the people of Ghana. And Akoto Ampaw was there. Spent long nights doing drafts and edits and the like, and rehearsing speeches with the Attorney General, who was the agent of the government of Ghana in that case, which we won resoundingly, bringing more oil money, but I don't think Akoto got any of that. Akoto was also an advisor and a friend of civil society in many, 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 many different ways. CDD, we got pro bono legal advice from him on a number of issues, especially labor-related issues. If we thought that we wanted to make a decision and we thought that we wanted to make sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's and not got in trouble with the law, we would have Akoto Ampaw counsel us on how to handle it. Star Ghana Foundation, before that, Star Ghana before it was a foundation. He's been with them, through the initial stages, Media Foundation for West Africa. He was a strong advisor to the trade unions, right? In many ways, the labor movement was one of the closest friends of Akoto Ampaw. And then he was just a regular citizen, without any particular portfolio, right? Citizen without portfolio. So he became, when the anti-LGBT bill was introduced, we at CDD led a number of civil society organizations, a few of them, spontaneously, to put together a coalition, a human rights coalition, to oppose the bill. We held meetings. We then put together a memorandum stating our objections to the bill that we then were getting ready to present to Parliament. Unbeknownst to us, Akoto Ampaw had also organized a group, a separate group of citizens, not CDD, not an institution, just private individuals. And I think a few days or maybe just the night or two before we submitted our memorandum to Parliament, here Akoto Ampaw shows up at the office with a draft of their own memorandum of this group, the Big 18, we came to call them, which essentially, raising roughly some of the same objections and more that the CDD Human Rights Coalition memorandum was also raising about the bill. And this, again, was very spontaneous. We had, in fact, no inkling that he had made that move, but he became the de facto leader of that group of 18. And the WhatsApp platform that was formed to encourage deliberation within the group has outlived Akoto Ampaw, and we continue to have close chats and other interesting conversations on that memo. On the day that the memo was heard in Parliament, before the Committee of Parliament, I presented on behalf of CDD Ghana and the coalition, and Akoto Ampaw presented on behalf of the Big 18 on the floor of Parliament. He was also a very strong public voice. Some of the images we've seen of him standing on the podium and talking. He appeared before, he was available to appear before, news and public affairs programs on TV, on radio. I remember co-authoring a couple of op-ed pieces with him in the Graphic about some matters that we were both concerned with. So you see that from the entire spectrum, this is a very wide spectrum of acts of citizenship. These are all acts of active citizenship, public engagement, trying to change the course of affairs, using all the tools at one's disposal, right? I remember when, and a lot of this is just a labor of love, right? There isn't anything, there was no remuneration attached to much of this task. I remember when a young woman who had otherwise qualified to be admitted to the bar was denied admission on the basis of some things that she had posted about herself on social media. That's liberal democracy in Ghana for you. And this was by the judicial establishment. I mean, basically the gatekeepers of admission to the bar. I didn't know that they were snooping around people's Facebook pages to see, if you describe yourself as gay or whatever, then they will say, in this particular instance, that was a crime, actually. So she said, well, no, you can't belong to the bar. And then, of course, Akoto Ampaw shot to action on her behalf. I remember I was late somewhere in Dakar, I think, when he said, we have to put something together, a statement together to go before the General Legal Council. And, Akoto Ampaw doesn't do social media or any of these things. So I shot into action, did some, research online, finding some cases and whatever. And this is late in the night. I think it was, Dakar time, which is probably the same time here, past midnight. And completely thankless job. I mean, he was basically doing this so that he could represent but she wouldn't get any representation. No lawyer was willing to represent her. So we were approached, and then, of course, our first point of call was Akoto Ampaw, and he took the case. Right? So this is how, in my view, this is how Akoto Ampaw exemplified active citizenship.
Highlights of a speech celebrating a man